Now, the monitoring process so far has taken place in 2 phases. The first phase is a paper kind of an examination. All that the working group does is looks at the legislation that has been put in place to implement the convention, to make sure that it is actually following the exact standards in the convention. The second phase is the phase that looks at how this legislative and institutional framework has been implemented in practice. And of course, this phase needs to look at enforcement actions also. And this phase involves an on-site visit to the country that is being examined. A 1-week on-site visit, and meetings are held with government officials from all of the relevant ministries, the police, the prosecutors, official development assistants, authorities, public procurement authorities, official export credit support authorities, as well as the private sector. There are several meetings held with the private sector, large companies, small and medium companies, and the accounting and auditing profession, as well as NGOs that are involved in the fight against corruption, and also academia and the media. These assessments result in a report which is adopted by the Working Group on Bribery and published on our website. And these reports are actually quite technical in nature because they go into the real nitty-gritty of the legislation of those countries to see if there are any loopholes in the legislation. They also result in a series of hard-hitting recommendations and follow-up issues. I'd like to give you some examples of the kinds of hard-hitting recommendations because I don't want to just stand here and tell you these countries are really doing careful assessments and giving these very, very difficult recommendations to countries to follow without providing you with certain examples. And I'll try not to be too technical about this when I provide the examples, but as I mentioned, they often are very technical because it's looking at legislation. The first example is Japan. When Japan was assessed in the first phase, it was discovered that there was a very, very weird loophole in its legislation. And I'll try to describe it this way. If a Japanese company bribed a foreign public official, but this Japanese company happened to have a main office in the country of the foreign public official, there was no offense. It came down to this. Even if the foreign public official had been bribed by a Japanese national in Japan, but there happened to be something called a main office in the foreign public official's country, there was no offense. The working group considered this to be a huge loophole, was very, very concerned about it, and recommended to Japan that they had to get rid of that defense. And Japan did, very soon after. So, it's a success story. The United Kingdom, maybe not so much of a success story. I know you've already heard of the BAE case today. I can't talk about cases, but I can talk about the recommendations that have come out of the Working Group on Bribery. All the way back in Phase 1, the United Kingdom was one of the first countries to be examined in Phase 1 in 2000, I believe it was. The United Kingdom was already told by the working group, you have got to get rid of this offense that you have of bribing a foreign public official. It's antiquated, it's based on legislation that's been around since the late 1800s, and it just doesn't work. The problem is that in the United Kingdom, bribery offenses, corruption offenses, are based on something called the agent principle concept. So in other words, if you bribe a foreign public official, it's only an offense if that official has violated the agent principle fiduciary duty. I don't want to get more complicated about it, except to say that that just doesn't work, and that does not satisfy the standards under the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, so the UK was told that they had to come up with a more modern legislative framework. It's been a long time since that recommendation was made. It was 10 years ago. The recommendation has been made several times since then. The good news is there is now a bill before the UK Parliament. A bill will be submitted to the UK Parliament, we hope, by the end of this year. What has occurred was there was a joint parliamentary committee established for the purpose of holding hearings on the draft bill, and the committee recommended passage without delay. So good news and bad news there. Good news, it's finally happening. Bad news that it took so long. Now, other states parties to the convention, some of them anyway, did not have corporate liability for the offense of bribing a foreign public official, and obviously that's a pretty important thing to have, that not only individuals, but companies can be held responsible for bribing foreign public officials. However, that's a very new concept in many countries around the world. It's a concept that's known in Anglo-Saxon legal systems, but not so much in other legal systems. And so some countries actually had to, for the first time, put in place corporate liability for a criminal offense. And it's interesting because it had a very positive spillover effect, they're having to do this, because not only did these countries put it into place for the bribery of foreign public officials, but they decided, let's take the opportunity and make it an offense for companies to commit other offenses, such as money laundering and accounting and auditing fraud. Two countries that have successfully put into place corporate liability due to recommendations from the working group are Bulgaria and Turkey. A couple of other countries are still struggling with the concept. One of them is Chile, and the other one is the Czech Republic. But they are working on it, and we hope that soon they will have something in place. Another interesting loophole that has come to the attention of the working group, and again, I'll try not to make it too technical, we call it the effective regret defense. In many Eastern European countries, including Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, the Slovak Republic, and Slovenia, it is actually a defense if you commit the offense of bribing a foreign public official and then you report to the law enforcement authorities that you committed that offense. In some of these countries, you might even have received the quid pro quo as a result of bribing. But as long as you go and you report that you committed this offense, there is no offense. It is a defense.